Hello, my name is Melanie Green, and I am the host of the Freelance Writing Podcast. I had this idea in April 2020 that I really wanted to create a space to discuss freelance writing, not how to get started in freelance writing, but really the nitty gritty when it comes to how to be a freelancer. I got busy and I wasn't able to start the podcast like I was hoping to in 2020. And then 2023, everything changed. Freelance writing is continuing to change at an unprecedented rate. And I really wanted to have a place to discuss that and to discuss the best practices with freelance writing. And you'll notice that's what we have here. In this episode, we're going to discuss the different freelance writing platforms and really if they're worth working on. In this episode, we'll specifically discuss Upwork, Fiverr, Scripted, and CopyPress. I will say that working on a freelance writing platform is not the only way that I freelance. It is some of the opportunities I've had have come through those platforms. I'm grateful for them. I think they're great opportunities for getting started, for having additional ways of spreading out where you're working. So if something happens to one type of freelancing, you're able to continue on. I will say that I don't think it's the most profitable or the biggest way that you can freelance, but sometimes it can certainly seem like the easiest. The first platform I want to talk about is Upwork. So I started on Upwork a long time ago when it was called Elance. It was when I first started freelance writing, and I had some clients that paid me very badly on there. I had a client, I think, that wanted like 10 articles for like $5. Of course, there's fees on that, and they wanted them in 24 hours. And so that was the kind of client that I was getting on there, and it was awful. So Elance became Upwork, and I had another client outside of Upwork say, well, we only work with freelance writers on Upwork. So if you want to work together, we're going to go on Upwork. I did one project. They kind of scammed me a little bit on there. And so I had just a bad taste in my mouth. I was like, oh, this is terrible. This is terrible. Then a large company, an enterprise level company that I've worked with for many years, is also on Upwork. And so years later, they wanted to go on Upwork. And I was like, oh man, I guess I'm going to have to use Upwork. And so I started working for this client on Upwork, this particular enterprise client. And I was kind of dipping my toes in the water because I was getting approached by other people. And I realized there's a huge learning curve when it comes to Upwork. And so, yes, there are fees that come out of it. I find that it's worth it to connect with the companies. And so I just kind of consider it a way of doing business. I do think you have to really adhere to the terms of service, and they're not always fair to freelancers. Sometimes they're very client focused, but that's just part of the game. You have to be careful that you're not going to work with clients that have bad reviews for other freelancers. And I will tell you, for a freelancer to leave a bad review on a client, the client had to be pretty terrible. Like, I won't even leave a 4 out of 5 unless I'm really trying to warn other freelancers or remember that it wasn't a great relationship. So just be really cautious. Your reputation is everything on Upwork, but it's not always fairly given. So you just have to be really aware of that. I think it's an awesome platform. Again, I wouldn't only freelance on Upwork, but I do think as long as you're not going to the lowest bidder, you're not trying to really underbid what your work is otherwise, right? It's an okay platform to be on. For me personally with Upwork, I would say that I've struggled to want to go to like the premium tier, right? That you can pay for the service. Because one of the real benefits, because I can just buy connects otherwise, is to really be able to control your earnings so people can't see how much you earn. But I earn a lot on Upwork, so I want people to know that. And also is to see what other people bid for projects. But I have found that I don't want to be the lowest bidder. If you don't want to pay to work with me, then I'm just going to work with someone else. There's so many clients that want to work with me already that I don't need to work with people who really just want to get the cheapest work. If they want cheapest work, they can go elsewhere. So that's why I haven't really done the premium tier there. In terms of Fiverr, I'm a Fiverr pro as well. I like Fiverr. The fees are higher on Fiverr than they are on Upwork. I don't get as much work, I would say. I get, 15% of the work I do on Upwork I get on Fiverr. So it's really not amazing in that sense. But I will say that they've been cool clients. And what I do is I have these gigs listed, and then clients can come to me if they want to work together. I don't love the communication standards that are really there, right, for Fiverr. So if someone sends you a spam message at 3 a.m. and you don't realize it, or you respond, at 8 a.m, they consider you having slow communication, which is very frustrating. A lot of people reach out to me to learn how to be freelancers or for me to give them work from there. And so a lot of that isn't really helpful for me. And so what I have found is that sometimes it's hard to keep up with that communication score. Scripted. Scripted, I have been on for a very long time. It has had many different iterations. And so some of those iterations I've loved more than others. In the beginning, you could become a favorite writer and you would be able to just take work and then complete it like a certain amount. Then they changed to more of a pitch system, which for me does not make sense. I don't need to be in a pitch system. It's not very effective for me because most of the clients that I work with want to work together for a really long time. And so working on like one pitch and sending this whole cover letter that you're probably not even going to read just wasn't really efficient for my time. Then they switched kind of more back to this favorited model where you can take work. And so I was able to do a lot of work from that. And then there's a couple times that they've kind of scammed me for money. There's twice that it came up where basically, well, I guess 3 times officially, but where I did like 10 articles, let's say for a client who loved me, and they said, oh, you're my favorite. And then they wanted a revision, but instead of just asking for the revision, they scripted reassigned it to someone else. And so I didn't get paid for those articles. They insist that they will, but that wasn't true. And so overall, I think like if you're making $10,000 on a platform, losing $300 is maybe not the reason to throw out the whole relationship, but that's been pretty hard. And then I sort of was blacklisted from Scripted. I had taken on a couple of assignments, and they didn't like that I kind of put the answer kind of towards the top of the question for these blog posts, and so they did the same thing where they took all the work back and I didn't get paid for it. And then on top of it, there was another article I took that I wrote, and then they changed the instructions. So then they said, okay, we're going to freeze your account and we're going to review it. And so they did. They froze it. I couldn't get any work. And then they reviewed it for quality and said the quality was fine. I've been restored. But they didn't actually ever restore me. And I realized that even years later, they never did, because they started to send me tons of emails, and I would click on them and say, oh, you can't see this anymore. Like, you're blocked from this basically. And so I had reached out multiple times, and they insist that that wasn't the case. So I unsubscribed from the emails because I was like, I'm not going to get 50 emails a day for assignments that I can't even work on. And so when I tried to be on the platform again, I realized that I wasn't allowed on the platform. And so although they have my name and my information there, and my platinum status as a writer for them, because my feedback was really high, hundreds of articles high. They blacklisted me, so I can't really fully endorse them at this point either. There's one other company that I really want to talk about here, and I'm using this kind of as a general company. I'm not necessarily saying specifically this company. There's several in this category, but I have a funny story about Copy Press, so I will discuss that here. So Copy Press was local to me, where I live, and I actually had interviewed for a job on Copy Press, like a real one, like you would go in person. And I wasn't really impressed, to be honest, with the staff. When I walked in, everyone was in like really, really casual clothes, and I was coming from an environment like at Nielsen and McKinsey and Company where things are a little bit more formal. And so everyone was just like putzing around on social media. It really wasn't my kind of environment. And so the interview went really well. I can tell that it went really well. And then they asked me if I had any questions. They had already introduced me to the team, whatever. And so I said, is there a long training process? Now, I was asking because I hate those training days, when you're sitting there and someone 10 years younger than you with less education is like, this is how we do it here. It's proprietary. We're the only company that does it, but really, like all the companies do it. So they took that because I asked for feedback after I didn't get the job, they took that as I would need too much training, which is funny because I didn't want any training, but fine. So I ended up becoming a freelancer for them. And they would send a lot of work over. It was very low paying, and especially compared to everything else. And then there was a couple of years where I was literally years they were behind on payment. So I had stopped working for them, but was still sort of trickling in money for work I did years prior. And so I would say that this is an example of a company that, they constantly say that they have the startup mentality, that they're, just getting, but they're older now, right? There's a lot of companies that are newer that don't have these payment issues and organizational issues. And so I would just say that you have to be really cautious. It's a cool company. I mean, I met a lot of cool editors there. A lot of people that I know that have worked for other companies have worked for them in some capacity, but they're out there. And I just make sure you're reviewing really the feedback about platforms and making sure you're making the most educated decisions. If there's a client platform that's consistently getting bad reviews, you might experience that. So if they're like, oh, they haven't paid me in 2 years, you can't go into that environment and then be like, oh, I'm so surprised they're not paying me, right? Because that's what happens. So just be cautious. That doesn't mean you're going to have the same experience. All of these platforms I think are great for somebody. Obviously my favorite are going to be Upwork and Fiverr for the reasons we've discussed. But know that they're all great and different, and some are scams and some are wonderful. And so you're just going to have to try things out. But don't be afraid of having more than one option available to you. And don't be afraid of really embracing the opportunities that can come from it, knowing your worth, and not working on platforms that don't work for you. Thanks for spending some time with me discussing freelance writing. If you'd like to connect with me further, please feel free to reach me at my website at www.melaniegreen.info.